You know, it's the deception that bothers me. The deception is cruel. I mean, from the moment they wrote the words, "We the people," leaders in the United States have relentlessly sought ways to subvert democracy in America. They've sought ways for outwitting their own founding documents for over 200 years. Even in the Constitution itself, you know, it provides for elections, and then it imposes mechanisms that render those elections pointless. The separation of powers, you know, the checks and balance system. Well, whose power is being checked? Elected power. The power of the elected representatives of the electorate. Nobody checks the Supreme Court, for example. That's really the supreme branch of the U.S. government, the Supreme Court. And those are lifetime positions. The framers of the Constitution seem to be primarily dedicated to creating a system that would ensure maximum inefficiency. Because the founding fathers were, as we know, deeply suspicious of government itself. I mean, think about it. No taxation without representation. That was the slogan. Well, that could go a different way. No representation, no taxation. If you asked Americans today, if you ask most Americans today, which would you rather have? Your whole paycheck or your senator? What do you think they would choose? Which do you think they would feel is more useful to them? Their full salary or their congressperson? Their congressperson who is completely subservient to his or her campaign donors and to whatever corporate sector they want to enter once they leave office. Their congressperson who listens and obeys lobbyists more than they'll ever listen to their constituents. I mean, the entire political platform for any candidate is calculatedly drafted to serve the interests of whatever business sector they're going to target for campaign funding. That's why they put the policies that they do or the proposals that they do. Elections in the U.S. are like talent shows. Just like those shows where the audience votes for whoever sings the best so that then they'll win a recording contract or something like that with a major producer. It's the same thing. You elect a politician, you know, whoever sings the best, so that then that politician can win lucrative deals with business. It's got nothing to do with your interests. You pay a higher percentage of taxes, in fact, than corporations, but corporations have a higher degree of representation than you do. I mean, according to what's called the Citizens United decision, that was in 2010, corporations have personhood status under the law, except it's a super personhood status because they're larger than life. Corporations have the right to free speech under this ruling, and that speech includes political campaign funding. So literally money talks. The rule says that it would be an unfair restriction on corporations' right to freedom of speech to limit how much money they can spend to get whatever they want from politicians. Freedom and democracy. You see? They come up with every possible way to shut you out. And who do you suppose made that Citizens United decision? Well, it was the Supreme Court. I mean, look at education, at higher education in the United States. A functioning democracy requires an informed and educated public. That's what Thomas Jefferson said. He said that a well-informed citizenry is the best defense against tyranny. So what can you deduce might be the objective when you make education prohibitively expensive? When you set up a system to restrict access to education for the citizenry and make it only accessible for the rich. Well, that's a recipe for tyranny, according to one of your own founding fathers, but that's what you're doing. I mean, my mother was still paying off her student loans when she was in her 70s. And you keep finding new ways to discourage people from going to university. It's not enough that you expect an 18 or 20-year-old to come up with more money than it takes to buy a house just to be able to get a degree. That's not enough. So you have to start creating useless degrees, you know, useless so-called disciplines, degrees in electronic feminist activism, degrees in navel gazing, so that you can then start to say, well, university is really pointless. As if there aren't still degrees available in the sciences, in law, in business, in history, in the fundamental disciplines. You make people think that university is all just a joke. You set up all of these absurd degree programs to make university look like it's pointless. So why bother? Everyone thinks just why bother? Why should I go into debt just to get a useless degree? Meanwhile, the children of the elite are still going to university because they're the ones who are on track to be the managers of society. they're on track to rule you. I mean, why do you think that they didn't allow slaves to learn to read in the South? The same reason that they don't want you to be educated. Because you're serfs. The U.S. is looking to revive domestic manufacturing. They want to bring back offshore factory jobs back to the U.S. They want you to be on an assembly line. They don't want you to have a lot of big ambitions about your future. They don't want you to have the intellectual tools for self-sufficiency or critical thought so that you can actually see and recognize and understand what your society really is.
Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, Africans. I hope you're faring well where you are, and if you ain't faring well, please fare well where you are. Yeah, it's been a while since I came here. Now, we are starting with a proverb from Jerusalem. One of the greatest kings from Jerusalem said that whoever loves money never has enough, right? Whoever loves wealth is never satisfied with their income. This too is meaningless, right? It's like chasing after the wind. If you love money, you'll never have enough. You love wealth, you'll never have enough. And this too is meaningless. What does this remind you of? What country has, or which country shares this property that Solomon is warning us against? See, in the words of King Solomon, there is nothing new under the sun. What has been will be again. And what is happening in America today is not something new. It is the same old disease, a disease that is now wearing a new face. This disease is not of the body, but it is a disease of the soul. The pathology of greed, racism, and dehumanization is a concept, right? Is a concept that was derived by Shahid Bolsen. The pathology of greed, dehumanization, and racism, right? A pathology is a study of a disease, right? It is a disease of dehumanization, a disease of greed, right? See, this is a sickness of a nation that worships wealth more than humanity, a country that paints its sins white and calls them history, and a country that builds walls instead of bridges in the name of freedom. So Shahid Bolsen, who is a Muslim white man, right, has spoken boldly against Western greed and moral decay. He once described America's empire as being built on the bones of other nations, drained for profits. And people are dehumanized in the name of progress. America is wearing a mask. You understand? It wears a mask of hypocrisy. You see, these times of Trump's only uncovered what was already rotting beneath the surface. A country that preaches liberty but practices exclusion. A country that celebrates democracy but fears difference. You know, you can't celebrate democracy and you fear a difference. Democracy, as told by Abraham Lincoln, is a government of the people, for the people, and with the people. That means there are some people who will disagree with you, and you still have to accommodate them. That is democracy. So without further ado, I want us to dive into this video, listen to Shahid Bolsen. I shall get back by the end of it, where we shall also have a deep, critical analysis. Let's dive in.
If you have something that they want, if you have something that they need, then they hate you. They demean you and they dehumanize you. You're not just an enemy to them, you're not even human. They need you to not be human so that they can morally justify to themselves all of the cruelty and the brutality that they will employ against you to exploit you, to use you, and to pillage whatever you have that they want. Because they want to be able to enslave and abuse you in good conscience. The most obvious example, of course, is slavery. But of course, that was just one, maybe the most acute and the most grotesque form of dehumanization that they did. But this is just their way. You know, from the enslaved Africans, they wanted their labor, and they wanted the wealth that was produced by their labor. Now, other nations had slaves. The Muslims had slaves too, but no one else in history, no one else in the world assigned slaves subhuman status. As I've talked about before, slaves in the Muslim world could rise to an even higher socioeconomic status than their masters. In the Muslim world, the slave and the owner were brothers. But in America, the slave was considered a beast of burden, and the owner of the slave was a sadistic beastmaster. Now, they needed it to be this way. They needed it to be this way because fundamentally, they do not know how or do not believe in peaceful, equitable transactions. They don't believe in mutual benefit. Mutual benefit to them represents some kind of loss for them. They don't believe in harmonious relations, fair transactions, fair exchange, and all of that. They believe in conquest. America was built on stolen land and sustained by stolen labor. And it has a long-standing habit, a tradition, of dehumanizing those who possess what it desires. So for the African slaves, they were dehumanized for their labor, for the sweat and tears that built the foundation of a nation claiming freedom for all. But they had to dehumanize them in order to make that claim, you see, because they wanted to be able to pretend that they were good, righteous, enlightened people who believed that all men are created equal. But they also wanted to continue treating African slaves as less than human, as less than equal. So they had to invent this idea that, well, they're not fully human, so therefore it doesn't count. It wasn't a violation of their principles to treat beasts of burden as unequal. By dehumanizing them, they were able to convince themselves that chattel slavery didn't contradict with their claims of virtue. Or you can look at the Native Americans. The indigenous inhabitants of that land for centuries were dehumanized for the richness beneath their feet, for the land. They were pushed to the margins. Their cultures were erased. The lands that they held sacred were violated, all for America's insatiable, ruthless hunger for more, for expansion, for dominance. They don't understand the idea of coexistence, of peace and harmony. They believe in the philosophy of the last man standing. That's their approach to the world. First within what's now the territorial United States, and then the entire Western Hemisphere, and then to the whole planet. This is what they applied. Mexico, Central America, South America, you see the Latin Americans, their natural resources were sought, and so their sovereignty was trampled upon. America's pursuit of what it desires has always been characterized by exploitation, domination, and subjugation. For all their talk about capitalism and the market, free exchange and so on, for all their talk about this, it's not what they practice, and it's not what they fundamentally believe. For them, capitalism means we make the money, we make the profit, we benefit. Everything is ours and nothing is yours. Well, that's not capitalism. It's barbarism. It's piracy. You can't go into a business deal or a negotiation with that mentality. That's the mentality that you have when you commit a bank robbery, not a business agreement. But you see, they can't admit to themselves that they're actually just glorified pirates, glorified mafiosos, marauders, because they have a need to believe about themselves that they're good, enlightened, civilized people. So the only way that they can reconcile their barbaric instincts with their need to believe in their own goodness is by dehumanizing everyone else, dehumanizing everyone who has what they want. And they want everything. The United States is the only country in the world who literally and seriously believes that control over the entire planet is vital to their national interests. Imagine. And we've gotten used to American dominance. We think the world actually has to operate like this. We imagine that there's no other way for international relations to be carried out except by means of hegemonic power. But of course, that's not correct. Just because one country or even a few countries have more power than others, that does not necessarily mean or automatically mean that everyone else just has to kowtow to them and be exploited and be pushed around and do as they're told. It doesn't have to be like that. That's a Western model, and it originates from the Western psyche, which developed through their own peculiar history and their own peculiar culture. Not everyone's like that. In fact, most people aren't like that. Are you like that? Of course not. It's abnormal. The truth is that even most average Westerners, most average Americans are not like that. And I think it's even less and less prevalent now among the common people in the United States, precisely because their own government, their own elites are now dehumanizing even them, subjugating even them. treating their own citizens as a subcategory of the human race who deserve to be exploited and disposed of after use. That's how the West and how America is treating its own people now, not just the global South. And yes, it's abnormal, it's pathological, it's sick. And most people, even most states around the world, are not like that. There's something wrong with you. I mean, China's not like that. China, by most metrics, is the largest economy in the world. It's a global superpower, not a regional one. It's a global superpower. But it's not trying to dominate and subjugate the planet. The Chinese approach to international relations is compatible with the historic Muslim approach to international relations. This is why we get along. This approach is one of harmony, mutual benefit, bilateral and multilateral cooperation. They don't feel that they're losing money if both of you make money. They don't regard your prosperity or the prosperity of others as a threat to their own prosperity. They believe in mutually profitable transactions. You know, for the Chinese, if you have something that they want, if you have something that they need, well, that makes you important to them. It makes you someone that they want to get along with. It doesn't make you an enemy. It doesn't make you, or it doesn't make them want to invade and colonize you. And understand this isn't necessarily based on any particular morality or moral principles. It's just simple practicality. It's good business. If you wage war on a country, then only some segments of your economy will benefit from that. You know, weapons companies, reconstruction-related industries, and so on. But there are huge segments of your economy which will suffer because of war. To the average Chinese business person, when they see casualty figures from, say, the war in Iraq or wherever else, they see from those casualty figures, well, that's just that many more people who will not be customers that we could have sold to because they're dead. That doesn't make practical sense. That's not good business sense. Forget about the moral right and wrong of it. Just from a practical business perspective, casualties of war don't go shopping. I mean, until recently, the U.S. economy was war-driven. It was the military-industrial complex. That was the driver of the American economy. But manufacturing as a percentage of the U.S. economy has declined considerably since Eisenhower first talked about the military-industrial complex. Things have changed a lot. I think it's reduced from around 32% to less than 10%. And about today, about 90% of American manufacturing is not connected to the U.S. military. That means that other business sectors have greater influence than they used to. Business sectors that may not necessarily benefit from war, but could actually be hurt by war. And as the domestic economic dynamics have changed, as you know, so too have the domestic power dynamics with the rise of private sector power and the globalization of private sector power, to where now the owners and controllers of global financialized capital are no longer tied to American prosperity. In other words, the old American model of domination and subjugation is not as appealing as it used to be, because the OCGFC have more diverse interests around the world. And I think that they, being profit-driven and being practical, are going to be inclining more and more towards the Chinese approach to international affairs, the Muslim approach to international affairs, the BRICS approach to international affairs. And I think that's what's happening. Because, yes, there will always be a segment of, say, Larry Fink's portfolio of BlackRock clients who can profiteer in the wake of war. But at this point, I think that there's a far greater proportion of clients in his portfolio who won't benefit from war and who would be harmed, whose interests would be harmed by war. And that means the death of Washington neocons. So the military-industrial complex created a monster, the neocons, the neoconservatives in Washington, whose policy proposals for any kind of international policy proposals always involve bombing. So they created this monster, but now that monster is redundant. It's obsolete. It's become a liability. But it's like an old device that cannot support a software upgrade. They can't adapt to the new political and economic landscape. So you still have these dinosaurs like Victoria Nuland calling for war with Iran, for example. But the OCGFC, in my opinion, do not want a war with Iran. So you have this comical exchange that took place, that reportedly took place between the U.S. and Iran during talks in Switzerland, where they were telling Iran let us conduct some attacks inside of Iran just for show, basically to appease the dying wishes of the neocons on their deathbed, but please don't retaliate. We don't mean it. Just let us do some attacks, and we won't escalate after that. And of course, Iran said, well, no. If you attack us, we will regard it as an act of war, and we will retaliate against your bases in the Middle East. Of course, attacks against U.S. bases in the Middle East will mean the destruction of everything that BRICS and the OCGFC and BlackRock have planned for the region. So no, Washington, I don't think, is going to get the approval for that. So then Biden is left with the only way to appease the neocons being to attack Iranian assets outside of Iran, attack them in Iraq and in Syria and so on. So you see how they're getting put in check? Because the global power dynamics have changed, and the U.S. is being forced now to try to adapt. And it's an entirely new experience for them. And they're adapting badly. Because again, it's just not their nature. They're offended at any constraints on their belligerence. They're indignant at the idea that the whole world should not just offer them tribute and gratefully subordinate themselves to American power. They can't stand it. It doesn't compute in their minds. This is a habit of thinking that predates their actual power, and then having power just made it worse. And I don't think that anyone, most of all the OCGFC, believe that they can ever change. And that's why I think America is gradually being sidelined and being abandoned by the global elite. Because they're incapable of updating their software. They're incapable of updating their mentality. And they're incapable of civilizing. Because having had the ability to impose their will around the world meant that they never had to civilize. And they don't actually possess any internal motivation to do so, and they never did. So ultimately, I think that they're going to be left behind. And it's starting to dawn on them, I think, that they're being left behind. But at the moment, I think they're still in denial. I think they're in denial. I mean, because, look, practically speaking, how exactly are you supposed to ever dial back from dehumanizing whole nations, whole countries, whole populations, and then treat them and expect to be treated by them in any kind of normal way? I mean, again, look at the situation inside the U.S. with African Americans. Until today, the racial situation in that country isn't normal. They still don't know how to deal with each other in any kind of a normal way. And the same applies now for the rest of the world and the U.S. Their relations with the rest of the world is very similar to their relations between the former slave owners and the former slaves. Because you dehumanize people. And how are you supposed to get past that? How are you supposed to get that out of your own mind? And how are they supposed to get it out of their own mind about you? It's very difficult. So now the same dynamic, the same dysfunction is going to potentially permanently plague America's relations with the rest of the planet. I mean, in some ways, you could say that BRICS, the BRICS countries, are almost performing a kind of an intervention, like with an alcoholic or a drug addict. The U.S. is reaching rock bottom, and BRICS is performing an intervention to force them to see, to face what they really are and how they really are, and forcing them to see the way they're going to have to be if they want to recover any kind of respectable role in the world. But until now, I think the U.S. is in denial. They can't face it. You know, Europe is kind of like that last friend of a drug addict who sticks by them until the end, until finally the addict steals from them and lies to them and betrays them too, and eventually they'll lose even that friend. You know, it's like that song says, America is smoking all of its friends down to the filter, and the inevitable reckoning is coming, and it's going to be hard.
So after carefully listening to Shahid Bolsen, here's my deep critical analysis. The vanity of an empire. You see, nothing lasts forever. Nothing lasts forever. It might take too long, but eventually nothing lasts forever. You see, like King Solomon observed, those who love silver and are never satisfied with the silver, America has built its empire on this endless hunger. The love of money has become the new god, replacing compassion, morality, and human connection. Every policy, every year, every election is driven not by the pursuit of justice, but by the desire for profit and power. In these times of Trump, this greed took on a new face and a new voice, right? It was loud, unapologetic and proud. Trumpism was and is not just a political movement. It is a reflection of America's oldest instincts to dominate, to control, and to accumulate. You see, the slogans of Donald Trump, "Make America Great Again," which means build the wall, were not new ideas, but old fears dressed in red hats. You see, these ideas revealed a deep sickness in the nation's heart, a fear of losing control over the very people America had long exploited. The walls Trump promised to build were not only physical, they were psychological and spiritual. You see, they separated neighbor from neighbor, black from white, immigrant from citizen, Muslim from Christian. And all of it was justified by the same lie America has always told itself, that some lives are more than others, right? It reminds me again, I'm always telling you this. If you haven't read the book Animals Farm, or even watched a clip about it, I think you should. It's about a farm where some animals have decided to revolt against the farmer. And once they've had the power, they've divided it among themselves in such a way that we have animals that are equal and we have animals that are more equal. What is more equal? More and equal cannot exist together, right? More and equal can't, it is a paradox. It can't exist together. So we have to look at dehumanization as a national habit in the America. You see, dehumanization in America has become a national habit. It began with the genocide of the Native Americans. It was perfected through the enslavement of Africans and continues today through mass incarceration, police brutality, and deportation. The story of America is a story told through the eyes of those who were erased from its pages. In modern America, black people are still seen not as humans, but as statistics, targets, threats, or entertainment. The system disguises itself with polite language, law and order, national security, economic progress. But underneath, it is the same machinery of exclusion that powered slavery and segregation. You see, the police killings of unarmed black men, the cages that are filled with immigrant children at the border, the silent suffering of minorities in forgotten towns. These are not accidents. They are symptoms of a pathology, a moral sickness that treats life as a commodity. America's system was never broken. It was built this way. The greed that fuels its economy and also its cruelty. You see, it extracts labor from the poor, culture from the oppressed, and life itself from the powerless, and then calls it success, right? America has also gone ahead and whitewashed history. These words according to Shahid Bolson. And whatever Shahid Bolson is saying is something which is verifiable by fact. They're not just opinion, they are facts. Verifiable. See, whitewashing is America's favorite medicine. It hides the wound but never heals them. Textbooks speaks of the founding fathers as heroes but never as slave owners. They praise the pilgrims for seeking freedom but forgot the blood that paid for their land. Hollywood tells stories of brave white saviors, while the true saviors, the black mothers, the immigrant workers, the activists, they are all erased. This whitewashing is not just historical, it is ongoing. It appears in the media where black pain is sensationalized and white guilt is softened. It appears in politics where history is rewritten to excuse oppression. It even appears in churches where Jesus, a man of color, is painted as a white savior of a white nation. You see, Shahid Bolson calls this the moral laundering of the West, a process where sin is washed clean through power. America does not repent, it rebrands. It takes its violence, its racism, its greed, and its new names, manifest destiny, the free market, and national security. And through this, the country continues its delusion of purity while standing on a mountain of bones. Right? So let's also have a look at Trumpism and the mirror of decay. The Trump era did not create division, it revealed it. Like a mirror, it forced America to see its true reflection, ugly, angry, and afraid. Trump words about immigrants being animals, right? His silence over white supremacist violence and his encouragement of nationalism were not accidents. They were truths long hidden beneath the polite smiles of politicians. Trumpism was not only about one man, it was about what America truly values. It shows how easily the nation could abandon morality for material comfort. It exposed the greed that lives in the soul of the nation, the belief that profit matters more than people, right? You see, and while the powerful grew richer, the poor grew invisible. The working class white Americans who believed Trump would save them found themselves also betrayed, while minorities continued to suffer the old pain in new forms, such as ICE raids, deportations, and daily humiliation. So they don't also have peace, they don't also spare their own, right? This is a double-edged sword. This is a double-edged sword. So, and while the powerful grew richer and the poor became more invisible, right? And also they deported their very own. So let's look at this deportation of humanity as a reinforcing statement to what Shahid Bolsen has stated. You see, in the age of Trump, deportation became more than a policy. It became a performance. Families were torn apart, children were held in cages, and the media moved on as if it was just another headline. The cruelty was not hidden, it was televised. What many failed to see, however, is that deportation was not only about foreigners. It was the deportation of humanity itself. It was the symbolic removal of compassion from the nation's soul. When America turned away the stranger, it turned away its own conscience. Shahid Bolsen often speaks about this moral collapse as the economic theology of the modern world, a religion where the market is God and human life is just an expense. America's love for money has reached a point where empathy is seen as weakness and greed as wisdom. But what is a nation without empathy? What is freedom when it only begins, or rather when it only belongs to a few? You see? So, that is one thing you need to understand about the mirror of decay and also the deportation of humanity, right? Now let's look at the pathology of greed. You see, Shahid Bolsen has carefully chosen these words for a very good reason. Greed is not only about wealth, it is about the desire to possess, to control, and to dominate. It is the root of racism, the mother of war, the twin of dehumanization. In America, greed has been baptized as an ambition, and exploitation has been renamed opportunity. From the slave plantation to Wall Street, the story remains the same. A few profit while many perish. The system rewards those who take, not those who give. Even morality has a price tag. Churches grow rich while the poor sleep on the streets. Politicians sell hope during campaigns and sell truth after elections. Shahid Bolsen warns that when greed becomes a virtue, society collapses from within. The love of money blinds a nation to its own decay. America, Trump says, has become like a modern pharaoh, building monuments of wealth on the backs of the oppressed. Now, these are the words of Shahid Bolsen. You see? Believing itself immortal even as it drowns in its own arrogance, right? So America just has a broken foundation. They are like Pharaoh. You know, the pharaohs were people who thought they were immortal. They believed in the afterlife, the afterlife is a true concept. It's a true thing. Let me stop using the word concept. It's It's a real thing that happens, that exists with us, right? So the pharaohs believed they were immortal. They concealed bad deeds with fancy names, right? Just like America does. Now let's look at this broken foundation, right? So if we peel back the white paint, beneath America's shining image lies a cracked foundation. The myth of equality was built on inequality. The dream of freedom was built on chains. The idea of progress was built on plunder. The country has always tried to heal its wounds with denial, but denial does not cure a disease. It only delays the truth. And the truth is simple. America's sickness is moral, not political. Its foundation is greed, not grace. As long as profit defines value, as long as race defines worth, and as long as power defines justice, America will remain a house divided, beautiful on the outside and broken on the inside. So let's conclude all this. Let's conclude all this. So to deconstruct America's pathology, it means to strip away its illusion, to see what lies beneath the symbols, the slogans, and the myths. It means to ask not what America says it stands for, but what it truly practices. Deconstruction is not destruction. It is healing through honesty. It is the courage to face the rot beneath the paint. It is the act of seeing the humanity in those who have been unseen. If America ever hopes to be healed, it must begin by dismantling the lie that money equals morality. It must remember the words of King Solomon, that the love of money, or rather the love of silver, is vanity, and that abundance without justice is emptiness, and that no nation built on greed can stand forever. Trump may fade, but Trumpism, the spirit of greed, racism, and demonization, will always haunt us. The cages may remain open, or rather the cages may open, but the walls remain. The money flows, but compassion dries up. America stands at a crossroad between repentance and ruin. The immigration playing at the border, the poor working without rest. They are the voice of truth in a nation drunk on vanity. And perhaps one day, when the silver no longer satisfies